Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Inspired Men Talk. And remember, this podcast is for the proof, really, that men do talk. And Inspired Men Talk is led by everybody who comes on the show and everybody who listens to the show. The biggest thing we want to do is get men talking and show that men do talk. So, first of all, let me introduce our sponsor, Mental Health in the Workplace. And this is being brought to you by Mental Health in the Workplace, or this episode is. And you can find them at www.mentalhealthintheworkplace.co.uk. I'm going to let Peter introduce himself and Christopher introduce himself. And before that, I'm going to say our apologies for Ben, who's not going to be here on this episode. He's working away, so apologies. He'll be on the next podcast. Peter, do you want to say hello and who you are?
Yes, certainly. Hello, everybody. Hello, Gary. My name is Peter Ely, and I'm a solution-focused hypnotherapist based in North London, and I help people with fears and phobias and managing their self-care.
Lovely. Christopher, who are you?
Hi, I am Chris, or Christopher, as some do refer to me as. They can't not, so that's fine. So I'm also a solution-focused hypnotherapist. I'm also a landscape gardener. So I've been in the trades for quite a few years. So I've got a good background there, and also working with young people in the Scout movement as well. So I've got quite a few different hats that I like to wear. But today I'm coming to you as a podcaster. So yeah, that's me. Can't wait to get on with it.
Thank you. And I suppose I should introduce myself. My name is Gary Johannes, and I'm a solution-focused hypnotherapist, part of Inspired to Change, and I work to help people be the very best version of themselves in all areas of their life. And I'm now going to hand over to our today's guest. We're very lucky that we've got an amazing guest on today. His name's Brian, and I'm going to let him introduce himself and tell us what his name is, because I can't pronounce it very well. So, Brian, hello. Tell us who you are, where you're from, and your story.
Hi, thanks, Gary. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me on. My name is Brian de Gruchy. I'm from South Africa, but the surname is French, actually. Thanks for having me on. I'll just get it out there right from the start. I'm a recovering addict, and I've been diagnosed with bipolar and ADHD. So there's the hard part of the conversation done, I think.
Absolutely. There's so many people who are in that space. So it's always lovely to listen to someone who's been there, done that, and wonderfully come out the other side to show that there is options. So let's hear how you got there.
So I guess I'll start where I am now, and that's in quite a good space, actually. I've come out the other end of it now, I think, which I'm very grateful for. And there's a number of amazing things that have happened along the way that led to this point. So, yes, there is hope. Yes, there is light at the end of the tunnel. But at the time when we're in that tunnel, it can be quite sort of dark and lonely and scary place. And I'm a bit of a tough guy. Well, I thought I was anyway. I've got a tough exterior. I'm from South Africa. I had a bit of a rough upbringing growing up on the streets of Johannesburg, where fighting for survival was the name of the game. But actually, that's not really who I am. Inside, I'm quite a vulnerable person. I'm a bit scared. I have fear and insecurities, and I'm a bit shy as well, believe it or not. So I was involved with drugs for many years and went into rehab a few times and got clean. And I've been abstinent from drugs now for 11 years.
Wow, that's amazing. Well done.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. But the only reason that that happened was because I made myself vulnerable and I asked for help. I think that's probably the biggest message that I could give to anyone, is just to ask for help. And it was difficult. I had to shine a light on parts of myself that I didn't want to see and that I was running away from. And I got clean, and fast forward a few years, I did find myself in a position where I had started neglecting my self-care. I was not going to the 12-step meetings that I used to. I had lost contact with my counselor and got caught up in the comings and goings of life, chasing money, chasing the dream. And incidentally, it was round about the time of COVID that all of that changed. My wife had just started her own franchise of a travel business, and then COVID hit, and so that was kind of dead in the water. And the ensuing 2 or 3 years that came after that, 2 years for us, brought on a lot of financial hardship.
Yeah, I imagine.
Yeah. So I was out running my own little construction business, trying to support our family, and it wasn't possible. So, we got into a bit of trouble financially. And through all of this time, I had been diagnosed with depression and
Hmm.
was on antidepressants. I also had a childhood diagnosis of ADHD, but that wasn't really at play at this point in time, or I wasn't consciously aware of it. And then I had been backwards and forwards to the doctor. They had me on the maximum dose of antidepressants and were starting to sort of not really know what else to do. They thought maybe it was treatment-resistant depression. They were talking about generalized anxiety disorder as well, because my baseline of anxiety was very
Yeah.
high. And then I started getting panic attacks as well, which was quite debilitating and very embarrassing, actually.
Yeah.
To see a grown man literally collapse on the floor, shivering in a heap, is yeah, it was a bit humiliating, actually, and somewhat shameful as well. And that's some stuff that I've had to work on. But anyway, the GP then suggested that they refer me to mental health services, and we started talking about ADHD as well.
All right.
And so thought that this was a good thing and things were going to happen. But unfortunately, because mental health services is quite overwhelmed, the
It is.
referral got rejected. In the process of all of this, we ended up having another baby as well. I should
You don't
just
do things by halves, do you?
no, 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 no. So yeah, that definitely added another dynamic to the situation that made it a bit more challenging for us. And then one day I was at work and I was pushing a wheelbarrow. Suddenly, it felt like somebody smacked me on the back of the leg with a baseball bat, and it turned out that I had ruptured my calf muscle,
Wow.
which in the grand scheme of things is not really a big deal. I remember looking around myself to see who was there and who had done this to me, and there was nobody there. I was completely alone by myself, but yet I could feel some kind of presence. And without wanting to get too philosophical, I now look at it as being my higher power, standing there with a big smile on his face saying, aha, it's time to listen now. You're going to get
Yeah.
the message one way or another.
Yeah.
And that was a significant turning point for me. I say that like it was a good thing, but it was absolute hell. I literally collapsed in a heap on the floor and started crying, and I knew that this was as far as
But
I
that was
could
quite
go.
recently, wasn't it? In terms of, was that pre or post COVID?
Sort of mid towards the end. It was probably from now about 2.5 years ago,
Okay. So
I
although
would
you've
say.
been clean for 11 years, this is a very recent factor.
The mental health side, yeah. And incidentally, I think just to add insult to injury, I was recovering from some broken ribs, and I had been on opiate pain medication, and I had just come off of that. So I think perhaps there was an element of psychological withdrawal going on at that same moment in time. But either way, I was a broken man, needed help. And so I then just began asking for help everywhere I could. I phoned the mental health support line. I took myself to the A&E. I was desperate. I was really, really desperate. And I ended up back at the GP, and then they put me on tranquilizers for a couple of weeks just to keep me calm, which is not the ideal situation for an
No,
addict to be in.
not really. So I'm really interested, Brian, of taking you backwards to you know, you was in South Africa, streets of Johannesburg, which is funny because that's my name as well. And I'm not South African, even though I've got a South African name. And wondering, you know, yes, you had a tough upbringing, so you're quite tough. You work in construction, so I imagine that it's quite tough. When did you, you know, how did you get into drugs? You know, from somebody sitting on the outside who's probably never been down that path. I understand it intimately from the outside, but never understood it from the inside because I've never been there. So how did you go find that pathway? How did it help?
Right. So I never felt like I've belonged.
Mm,
It's like I've been, I don't know how to describe it really, some kind of spirit or something walking around in some kind of person's body. I've never been very good socially in terms of friendship groups and stuff like that. I was very badly bullied
mm.
at school. Corporal punishments at school and in the home was quite a big thing back in those days as well. So it wasn't uncommon to get a hiding with the belt for doing something wrong. And so I had a lack of identity, a lack of belonging. I didn't know who I was, what my place was in the world. And I didn't feel safe or connected either. And that's not to blame anybody or point fingers, but that was me and what it was
Yeah.
like through my eyes. And then I started becoming a bit of a nuisance child and causing trouble at school to try and win some rapport with the bullies.
Right. So the
So when I,
comedians often say
yeah,
that's how they got funny, or the troublemakers, you join in with the trouble.
exactly, exactly, yeah. And so that ultimately ended up in me getting kicked out of school. And I went to a new high school after that. My grades were never particularly good. I had the potential to do well, but I just was not interested in school. I couldn't give a hoot.
How much do you
Um,
think of that as even being part of where your ADHD was possibly driving that behavior?
well, yeah, I mean, I had been diagnosed at the age of 7 with ADHD and was put onto medication for it. Whether it helped or not, I don't actually know.
Mm,
But when I went to the second high school, I decided at that moment that I was going to become the bully
right.
and turn things around, which is exactly what I did. And to be fair, it worked. And through that, it just sort of happened to be at that time when South Africa was transitioning from the apartheid era into the new rainbow nation. So all of the sanctions had been lifted, and the rave scene and the drug scene and all of that
Right.
just descended on South Africa like an atomic bomb.
It's interesting you said that you became the bully. One of the things which I've learned probably more from being a therapist than being involved in, you know, being bullied or whatever, is I now understand that every bully has to be bullied. It's a, you know, you pass it down. If I'm being bullied here, I bully the next person down the line. So, you know, you could see that behavior is a survival instinct. You know, if you're being bullied, you bully someone else. So I can see where that comes from.
Yeah, I think perhaps that sort of resonates with the idea of generational trauma as well, and how things are perpetually passed down. So, yeah, in that process, I discovered drugs, and my progression through the different types of drugs was quite quick.
Mm.
And it was the first time in my life that I could honestly say that I felt okay, that I wasn't scared, that I felt like I belonged, that all of these conversations that were going on in my head were suddenly quiet. And as Gabor Mate says in one of his books, that it's hard to get enough of something that just about works. So
Yeah.
the moment I found that peace, I needed more of it.
So I'm waiting for the others to jump in and ask some questions, but they're not very good at
Well, we
it.
would, but you haven't invited us in to talk. So
You know,
okay, let me jump in.
I've just got so many questions, and I think, you know, there's
No
so many
problem.
amazing topics he's bringing up.
No, there is. So firstly, Brian, thank you very much for sharing with us. You know, I can relate a little bit to the addiction side. I used to have an unhealthy relationship with alcohol, and you know, it kind of can take over your life, and it does, right? And I'm glad to say that, like you, I'm now in a much better place in relation to that. But how did you find that your addiction affected your day-to-day life and your relationships?
Well, in the beginning of my addiction, I was still quite young. I was only 14, 15 years old at this stage. And so I didn't really have much to worry about in the way of relationships or day-to-day life. I left school, so it affected me in that sense. But that for me was fantastic because I wasn't interested in going to school anyway. It just meant that I could go and hustle on the streets and take more drugs. But it did become problematic later on in life when I was in relationships, like with spouses and things. But yeah, I think I'll come to that
It,
in a minute if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
one of the books I'm quite keen on is about the difference between dependency and addiction, and they define it as you might be dependent on the substance, but actually the addiction is the feeling of being surrounded by like-minded people, by being in the bosom of some something and a group of people who accept you for who you are. Do you find at 14, when you was feeling a bit lost, actually those people who were raving, those people who were on the drug scene, actually just let you be who you was? You didn't feel so lost, even though you
Yeah,
possibly
so there was that whole kind of lovey-dovey hippie vibe with everything, and everyone got along, and you were just there for who you were. But the other side of it was that because I was involved in drugs and started selling drugs as well quite early on, that I became cooler than all of the bullies. So I had a bit of a social status, if you will. So there was definitely those elements at play as well. Anyway, I got involved in gangs and all of this stuff, and it got the whole drug scene in Johannesburg got a bit top heavy and started caving in on itself. And I was caught up in the middle of that and decided that it was time to change my life. So I went into rehab for the first time. And that was the first time that it became exposed to a 12-step fellowship. I got off the hard drugs and decided to get out of the city and train to become a safari guide in the hospitality industry, and went to go and work on a remote game reserve on the arse end of South Africa. And it was some of the best time of my life. I had some experiences there that most people never even imagine are possible. But I was still drinking alcohol because I thought as long as I wasn't running around getting shot at and sticking needles in my veins and putting things up my nose, that it was okay because it was socially acceptable.
yeah.
I was high functioning. I did really well. I climbed the ladder. I was quite successful, but it did eventually catch up with me. And I met my now wife while I was a safari guide. And we had to move back to Johannesburg because her son from her first marriage needed to start going to school. And so we moved back to the city, and I found that really difficult after 10 years of working in the remote wilderness. And my drinking then spiraled out of control. And basically, she just kicked me out and said, I don't want you anywhere near me or my child if you're behaving like this.
Mm.
I went to rehab again for the second time and did all of that stuff all over again, but with a bit more maturity and a bit more willingness this time. And that did the trick. It got me off all of that stuff.
What was the driving force behind that? I know you say your missus kicked you out, but you'd actually got to a point when you was more into the drug side of things and decided actually got to change. That's a massive step. No, most people don't manage that so well. And then you found a new career done really well. And yes, you were still drinking, but functioning. But what was this, what was the real catalyst for the second go?
Because, as they say in one of those fellowships, that you can go to a meeting once and are we allowed to swear, by the way?
Yeah, you can do what you like.
So I went to one of those fellowships once and they said, don't worry, you'll be back because this meeting will fuck up your using for the rest of your life. And that's exactly what it did.
So
Because
explain, as somebody who's never been on that side of things, explain what that means, because I don't know what that means.
because in that alcohol or drug fueled state, there's either when I'm not drinking or taking drugs, I can't stop thinking about it and when I can do it and how I'm going to get it. And then when I do have it, it's about how I can have more.
Mm.
There's no off switch. I don't know how, I don't know why. It just one's too many and a thousand's never enough, as they say.
Yeah.
And so if it was anything other than those two things happening, I was not a happy person. But I also knew in the back of my mind, because of that phrase that I just mentioned, that this is not how life is supposed to be. There's something going on here inside of me. There's some kind of turmoil that I'm trying to get away from. And I don't know what it is, but I know that it's there and I know that it's painful. And basically what it boils down to, and turned out to be largely the case with my mental health difficulties as well, was the fact that I was trying to self-medicate. I was trying to change the way that I feel.
Yeah.
Because I didn't like feeling these feelings.
I think that's something we've all heard many, many times from people who addicted to anything, whether that be drugs, gambling, alcohol. I think a lot of them say that it's self-medication. Even the people who take prescription painkillers, and it's self-medicating. And I think that's something a lot of people can resonate with. But when did you get to that point where you could function without that monkey on your back, as it were, without that constant reminder of when you're next going to get that drink, that drink, anything? How long did that take you to get to the point where you can enjoy your life?
It was very much a process of peeling back the layers of the onion, as it were. When I went into treatment for the second time, I was in an inpatient facility and I stayed in a halfway house for 3 months after that to make sure that I had a really good foundation. And I had to be quite careful afterwards about changing the way that I behaved. So for instance, I wouldn't go and hang out with mates at a pub. And I thought that at one point in time, I couldn't imagine myself having a life that did not involve having a drink worse. And it was just completely inconceivable to think of anything other. And I don't know when the specific moment happened, but it was a gradual process. And in one of the fellowships, they talk about the concept of just for today. And it really hinges on the idea of just letting go of the forever thing, that I can't drink forever or I can't pick up a drug forever. What I just need to do really is be present and in this moment. And right now, I'll be okay. And I am where I am because I have big accumulation of just for today's.
Yeah, no, I understand. So, I mean, you talked about using drink, drugs, and all these different things to handle your mental health effectively. And then 8 years or so, nearly 10 years after you've been abstinent of all of these things, your mental health comes and kicks you in the back of the leg, as you put it.
Yeah.
So was that the point where maybe your body, your mind accepted, okay, he's not going to go and get another drink. we need to let him know that we need to find another way of dealing with this now. Do you think that's something that maybe happened in that moment?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly what happened. Basically, if I like the analogy of that, for whatever the reasons were in my life, I built a wall around myself to protect myself. Traumas, experiences, whatever we want to call it. And in so doing, I imprisoned myself. I became the prisoner of my own mind.
Mm.
And the stuff going on in my head is kind of like taking a rubber bouncing ball and throwing it against the walls of this cell inside my head, and that's my thoughts and the chaos that goes on, and it just keeps ricocheting all over the place and becomes completely unbearable. And so at that time, with the calf injury and all of that stuff going on, that was the time where I realized now that this is actually what's going on with me, and I need to do something about this, because despite the fact that I've been abstinent from drugs, the problem hasn't gone away.
Yeah.
And that at its core, I need to work on this some more.
So just to clear things up, at this point, did you know you was bipolar? Was you diagnosed bipolar at this point? Or is
No,
this where we're going?
yeah, that's where we're going. So yeah, we've kind of gone full circle now from the drugs and back to the mental health thing. Yeah, I was referred to mental health services, and they did lots of investigations, and they concluded that I have bipolar type 2. There's 5 different subtypes. Mine is the more sort of depressive variation, and the manic episodes are not quite as hectic as what they are in some of the other variations. And they put me on antipsychotic medication. And initially, that was really, really good, because it just dulled everything out. And that bouncing ball in the head just kind of ceased to exist for a moment. And that was a good feeling. It gave me a bit of relief. It gave me the space to take a deep breath and just kind of find myself again. But it wasn't very long before I realized that this was only going to be a short-term solution, because in addition to not having the panic and the loneliness and the fear and the chaos, there wasn't much joy or happiness either, because those drugs are not very selective in terms of emotions. They kill the whole lot. It's all or nothing, really. And they also have some pretty bad side effects, one of which is weight gain. So I put on a massive amount of weight. And after time, some of my symptoms started to actually come back again. The racing thoughts and the bouncing ball started to gain a bit of momentum again. So I think also what happened was, got caught up in this idea of trying to put a label on this whole thing. So I need to know what my labels are. I need to know what my symptoms are. I need to put this thing in a box. And it then occurred to me, like, well, what difference is that going to make to anything, really? And this is about me, my feelings are mine and my thoughts are mine, but they don't define who I am as a person. And so I kind of decided not to stay in the trap of thinking that, cool, I'm going to take a pill now and that's going to fix all my problems and I can just carry on like that. I need to actually do the hard work here, and that the medication is only a stepping stone. It's not there to make, give me the easy way out, as it were. And I think that's a common misconception that a lot of people have. So I then started on this quest of exploring other areas outside of medication that could help me. And interestingly, hypnotherapy was one of them, as well as counseling. And yeah, that's really then where the good stuff started to happen, when I opened myself up and became sort of relentless in my pursuit of wellness after that.
What type of hypnotherapy did you have?
It was solution based. It was with Holly, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we did do a few sessions, and that definitely did help. It calmed me down quite a lot.
Well,
I started experimenting with different types of meditation and mindfulness. I started looking at exercise. I started looking at nutrition. And basically, it's a bit of a cliche, but I broke myself down into 3 components: mind, body, and soul, and resolved to do something positive for myself in each one of those areas every day. And if I was to look at diet, for instance, it wouldn't necessarily be a case of having to eat something healthy, but it might be making the choice to not eat something unhealthy. And I've started just gradually building on each one of those stepping stones or those blocks every day. And in the mind space, doing sorts of things like CBT and examining my values and my beliefs, my limiting beliefs, my people pleasing, those sorts of things, having quite an inward look. And then also looking at this whole spiritual side, because there was a time prior to the mental illness where I had given up on all of that and said that I'm going to see the world through the lens of science, and spirituality and science don't actually mix with one another. So this is the side of the fence that I'm on. I've subsequently realized that science and spirituality knit quite nicely together if you know anything about it.
Yeah, we do. And we work quite closely with the two. One gives to the other.
So yeah, I started also going back to 12-step meetings and became involved in that. At one point on this quest, I was watching a Wayne Dyer documentary, and he made a comment in there about being of service to other people. And it was a light bulb moment for me, because one of the pillars of the 12-step fellowships is being of service to other people. And so then I started going back to the meetings thinking that I was going to help everybody, only to discover that I got more help than anything I could ever have given. It was just, that really reminded me what it's like to be vulnerable. And that's become such a big part of my life now, is doing the hard thing, doing the difficult thing, doing the thing that I don't want to do because it's scary. And to do that, I have to open myself up and make myself vulnerable. And that can hurt. And that's okay.
Yeah, I think you've made a really great point there, that a lot of people think that the medication is going to be the fix, and that actually it's there as a support, and that you actually have to put in the effort yourself. What was there anything else kind of, you said you had this light bulb moment while listening to Wayne Dyer. What kind of prompted you to go, right, I need to go back to doing the 12 steps? What was the catalyst for that for you?
Because it was perhaps a structured way to help me reconnect. Having done it before, I've always felt safe with the 12-step programs. It was the one place when in all those years back when I went into those meetings that I never felt like somebody or some kind of organization had a hidden agenda and was out to take something away from me. It was the one of the very few times in my life that I felt safe and like I could trust something and that its intentions were pure. So I think that was my motivation for wanting to go back there. And then also sort of, because that is a spiritual based program, it was a way for me to kind of navigate this realm that I had turned my back on. And also, just to add, having been a safari guide, I have a very keen love of nature. And I struggled very much in the beginning to find a concept of God like it asks us to do in the first 3 steps of a 12-step program. You know, you come off battered and bruised, and you have to go in and find it. And it's like, what the hell? You know, this is asking a bit much. It's never going to work. And I think it scares many people away, actually. I was lucky enough to, because of my experience with nature, to reframe it into something a bit more tangible and change the concept to Mother Nature and the world around me and the environment, and my ability to to connect with nature and to be open and to listen to the language that nature speaks to us, which is quite an amazing thing, really. And that was that combined with going back to the fellowship got me pointing in the right direction in a spiritual perspective.
You know, to me, all of the things you've been talking about, the steps you took when you decided, you know, I need to do the hard yards, I need to make the effort to be a better person, to be better for me. It's what we refer to in our therapy rooms, all three of us, as the 3 Ps. That, you know, those are the things you're talking about now. And those are positive actions, positive interactions, positive thinking. You know, your mind, body, and soul is ticking all of those boxes, you know, and going back to the 12 steps organization that's your tribe. That's what I'm taking from it, you know, that's your tribe. That's where you feel you're getting your most from those interactions, you know, and that's everything you're saying. You've almost become addicted to looking after yourself now, which is perfect. You know, and you've summed it up in such a beautiful way for you. And I think people hearing you, I mean, I could listen to you talk all day. You've clearly been through the yards of this. You know, but you've summed it up in such a beautiful way for you. And you've openly said it was hard. You know, I think there's a lot of people out there that could learn from you and your experiences. They really, really can.
Thanks, Chris. To add to that, there's been lots of tears along the way. And I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean that as in tears running down my face. And it's a truly liberating experience to let yourself cry when you need to. I think there's this huge misconception out there of cowboys don't cry and men don't show emotion and stuff. And that's not true, man. And from a scientific perspective, when you cry, your body releases oxytocin, which is a feel-good hormone anyway. So, you know, there's nothing shameful about having a good cry for a bit of a feel-good hit.
Yeah, very true. And very similarly, the word that kind of struck and came back to me when you were talking about the program was belonging. And it's almost like it's giving you back the belonging that wasn't there earlier on when you were kind of going through the addiction phases, is what it feels like to me anyway. So how has your life changed then? So you've taken on this new mantle, you're looking after your self-care. What's changed for you?
Everything and nothing, because they say the more things change, the more they stay the same, you know. So I'm still married to the same wife, I still have the same children, I still live in the same house.
I mean, that's a good point. When did she take you back?
I hadn't got to that. So it was about 6 months after she kicked me out, she took me back in. And yeah, it's been a bumpy road, but we are where we are. And to be honest, she's been a huge pillar of support for me. And we were talking about action, you know, and she was one of the first people I went to when I asked for help. And it's a difficult thing to do, to ask for help for a lot of people, because in order to ask for help, we have to have an awareness of ourselves, and we have to be able to admit that something is actually wrong in the first place to be able to take that step. You know, and I digress slightly now, but that was, yeah, I have a huge debt of gratitude to her, because I wouldn't be where I am. And I know that different people's situations are different, and they might not have a partner that they're able to ask for help. But I can also say that every person along the way, doctors, nurses, therapists, counselors, hypnotherapists, everybody that I asked for help tried their best to help me. And there's a lot to be said for that, you know.
Yeah. You know, and from what you were saying, sometimes through fault of the system or just circumstance, sometimes you didn't perhaps get the help that you needed when you needed it. And I think it's a huge testament that you kept going back for more help, you know, even back to the first time you went to rehab. Yes, it got you off the hard drugs, but you were still drinking, but you went back when you needed to. When the mental health services rejected your referral, you went back again and asked for help when you knew you needed it most. So I think there's a huge testament to you to tell other people, keep asking for it. Just because you've asked for help once doesn't mean you've used up all your goes. You can keep asking for help more and more. And I think that's a huge testament that you didn't give up.
I agree, and I think one of the interesting things, again, I might be way off the mark here. I've always had the opinion, I'm a bit of a rugby fan, so all the South African rugby people I've ever met have been, that old-fashioned men and men, and I just have an idea that you've grown up in a very masculine world, and masculine means no vulnerability, because that's weakness. And you've actually come through that to use your vulnerability as strength, which it truly is. And you've been okay to cry. You've been okay to go through those hard yards. But how much harder do you think it is when you've been dominated in your whole culture to be man? Did you have to wrestle with that too?
I was kind of lucky in the sense that because we had moved to England, I was able to separate myself from an element of that physically and geographically. It is a very predominant cultural factor. You 100% hit the nail on the head with that. And even in my family still. But I guess that's where the whole idea of boundaries comes into play, and that if that's how other people want to be, that's fine. I am not the status quo. I can use this South African rugby player kind of tough mentality in a positive way, in terms of not giving up and fighting my corner, asking for help when I know that I need it. And I think that's a nice kind of reframe on the whole macho attitude of things.
Yes, because strong doesn't mean that you can't be vulnerable. Strength is vulnerability.
Yeah.
And toughness is having that vulnerability and doing it anyway. So that's amazing reframe.
I mean, I think we could all ask you questions for quite a long time. I don't know. I think we're probably getting close to time here, aren't we?
Yeah.
But yeah, you just one more thing from me. You mentioned just then boundaries, setting those boundaries. Now, again, earlier you mentioned one of the steps and one of the things you had to do was separate yourself from those people going down the pub for a drink. How did you find that with those relationships you'd built with those that you felt like you fit with those people for the first time ever? Those initial people where you first started going down those dodgy lines and started getting into those worlds that you felt like you fitted at the time, but clearly weren't good for you. How did you find cutting off those ties? Was that a hard thing? Was the people supportive of you, or were they trying to drag you back down with them?
They were mostly trying to drag me back down. There were some very difficult conversations that had to be had, what I could almost sort of describe as a breaking up a relationship in a boy/friend context.
Yeah.
And that's what had to be done. When the sort of dust settled and the fog cleared, it was very apparent which was the correct way forwards and which friends were healthy and which ones weren't. And these things have a tendency to sort themselves out organically. But I did need to make sure that I was going to be loyal to myself, and that was the thing that was driving these decisions.
And with that in mind, do you have kind of a daily routine that kind of keeps you focused?
I do actually. My time is very limited. We have 3 kids. I'm busy doing a life coaching course actually, because I'm getting a bit tired of tearing my calf as a builder and so on. And because I actually just genuinely want to help people and share this experience with them. But in the small amounts of time that I do have, I do a 10-minute meditation in the morning when I wake up. So literally the first thing I do when I open my eyes, when I'm still in that kind of half asleep, half awake state, I do a 10-minute meditation. I've got a favorite go-to that I like to use. And then every evening, the only place in the house that I can call mine for a short period of time is the bath. So I have a little candle that I light, and I burn some incense and have a nice bubble bath, and either put some relaxing music or a meditation or something like that on, and just have that time for myself. Whenever there is any other opportunity, I like to exercise and do like qigong stuff and stretching and yoga and those sorts of things. My personal preferred method of exercise is martial arts, because it's quite versatile. It's got a bit of fitness, it's got a bit of stretching, a bit of, you know, muscle building stuff. So whenever I get the opportunity, I do some of that stuff as well. But yeah, definitely I have to meditate. And just to be clear, I think a lot of people have this idea that meditation is going and sitting in a quiet place and quieting our mind and getting all zen like, and it's nothing like that. Our minds can't be quieted. So for me, it's just a case of being able to have a few minutes to be still and just become detached from all of that stuff and watch it going on, and just put a little bit of space between me and my mind. And that's really what meditation is all about for me.
So to finish up, because we are really on the edge of time, if you was to give some tips to somebody who is at that crossroads where they're still addicted, even if it's to life of eating too much or being a people pleaser, and they just need to get that fix of being liked the whole time, or they're on alcohol or drugs or whatever, if you were to say, you know, one thing you can do to start moving into that direction where you're taking, and you used a beautiful term earlier of honoring yourself, what's the first step for someone to take to move to where you are now, where you're managing it beautifully?
So I think that usually when a person's in that place, it's a dark place, it's a lonely place, and it's not very happy. But I can say with my hand on the heart, my hand on my heart, that you are in the best possible position that you could ever be in, because that's the start of a journey of self-exploration and change. And many people on this planet will never even know or explore those parts of themselves. So there's so much to be gained from doing this, and it's really just about taking action. It doesn't really matter what it is that you do, just do something. It's the best advice I could give.
Thank you.
And if it doesn't work, keep trying until it does.
Stick at it.
Yeah.
Stick out. But Brian, thank you so much. We're probably going to ask you to come back on later in the, you know, early next year or something like that, because literally Christopher's right. We could talk to you for hours. You do have a weird accent, you know, goes with my name, not yours, but you know, but lovely to meet you. And it's gonna, you know, what you've just said is going to highlight so many people. You know, it's going to be good. So thank you, guys.
Yeah, Brian, thank you so much for sharing, being honest with us and being open with us. I know that sometimes that can't be hard, but it was really lovely to hear your story, and to hear how you've come through it. So thank you so much for sharing with us.
Yeah, honestly, it was a real pleasure. You tell your story with real honesty, and you know, you've given some really good advice to some people who I think need to hear it. I thank you for pulling yourself away from your three kids for an hour or so to be with us. I know the feeling. So you could pretend you're on the call for a bit longer if you want. We don't mind.
Yeah, he would have been in the bath if it wasn't for us chilling. Last thing, if you do, or if you're happy for people to connect with you, I don't know if you are, but if you're happy, how would people who found that story move in or would like to speak to you, how would they get hold of you?
I would be happy to share my contact details with you if you were happy with that. Otherwise, people can just look me up on Facebook, Brian de Gruchy. It's that simple, really.
Yeah. So we'll put that link on our description of the podcast. So if people want to contact you or friend request you on Facebook, that's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on. It's been a real treat, and I hope it can help somebody.
Yeah, thank you and we're going to finish the podcast now, but we'll probably talk afterwards. So thank you from me. Goodbye.
Yeah, thank you ever so much. And thank you all for listening, and goodbye.
And goodbye from me.